Shall we get started? Everybody's busy. We said noon to 2. We'll try and keep it to that. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here, and forgive me for using the microphone. We're a relatively small group, and I wouldn't use the microphone except that we're videotaping this presentation today for any candidates who couldn't make it or any of you who may want to see this again, members of the public who are interested in. So all of us will be using this microphone or some microphone during our presentations this afternoon so that we capture that on video. I want to welcome all of you. For those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet before, my name is Cadence Matievich. I am one of the 2 assistant city managers here at the City of Reno. And I'm going to fill in on the welcome for Andrew Klinger today. He sends his apologies. He has been up at the university all morning working with them on a very important strategic planning meeting that they had anticipated would be done by now, but they've kept him a little longer. So he sends his regrets. I hope he'll be able to make it in sometime before we're done at 2 o'clock and say his hellos. But so I will extend a welcome on his behalf to all of you. Thank you for being here today. Congratulate you on desiring to run to serve as an elected official for our great city. We need people like you who are committed to their community, committed to helping us bring this city and this region to its full potential as we move into a very exciting future. It's an exciting time for us here at the city. It's an exciting time for our community. We've got some great things that are happening. A number of you may know about our Smarter Regions initiative. Some great things happening just blocks away from City Hall here on Startup Row. Exciting new vibrant business districts coming up in Midtown and other parts of our city. So it really is an exciting time for all of us as city staff and for all of us as Reno residents. And we look forward to sharing with you over the next 2 hours a high-level overview of our city organization. We've structured this presentation based on what we've heard from previous candidates, kind of the most important things to highlight as you begin your candidacy. And some of you I know have had an opportunity to meet with Mr. Klinger and other members of the staff. And so we've created this presentation based on what the most common questions are, if you will. So if there's something that we haven't covered in this presentation today, a department that we don't focus on, it's not because it's not important. It's not because we don't take it as seriously as any of those that we may go into more depth about today, but we want to give you the information that we think will be most valuable to you in these early days of your candidacy as you're out meeting with the individuals, businesses, others that will be potentially your constituents if you're fortunate enough to be elected to office here at the city. And so, again, it's a high level. We've got a number of different presenters today. Would ask that you keep if you have questions for the presenters, we'll take a brief break in between presenters, give you a chance to answer a couple of questions, and then we do have some time on the agenda at the very end for additional questions as well. One other request that I would make on Andrew's behalf, I think you all received folders, and in those folders should be Andrew's business card along with Visha Siddharthan, who many of you may already know, Mr. Klinger's executive assistant. And we would ask that if you wish, after this presentation, if there's additional information that you're looking for or throughout the process of going out on the trail, if you will, and you have other members of city staff that you would like to schedule a meeting with, get additional information from, we'd ask that you coordinate that through Visha. And the reason for that is, as you can imagine, there are 38 candidates running for Reno City offices. And we know that you need information, and we are absolutely committed to getting that to you. But you can imagine that if each of those 38 candidates asked for an hour-long meeting with each one of our department heads, that's an awful lot of staff time. And so to the extent that we can be more efficient and effective with that time, if there are kind of consistent questions that we see coming through, we can get that out to everyone and try and be as efficient as we can with our limited staff resources. So we appreciate your consideration in that and ask that you filter those requests through Visha, and we'll do the very best that we can to get you the answers or the meetings as quickly as we can. And then with that, let me see if there's anything else that Andrew would have passed along today. Again, thank you all for attending. We wish you the best of luck in your candidacy. And with that, I am going to move into a general overview of Reno City government. And this is, again, a very high-level overview, really intended to kind of give you a brief snapshot of how our organization is formed, how we're structured, how we interface with some of the other governing entities, particularly the state of Nevada. We know that as you're out meeting with your constituents, there's going to be questions. You probably already met people who don't really understand what it is that the city does as compared to maybe Washoe County or the state of Nevada or some of the other governmental jurisdictions. So I'll try and give you a little bit of information here. For some of you, it will be a refresher, something that you live every day, and for others of you, it may be new information. So we at the City of Reno are what is known as a charter city. In the state of Nevada, there are two different kinds of cities. There are charter cities and there are general law cities. We were incorporated in 1903. We were actually incorporated once before that in 1901, and that we were then disincorporated after that and reincorporated in 1903. So we consider 1903 to be our birth date. That's the year that we use when we count off birthdays. And so 1903 is when we consider our incorporation. Our current city charter was established in 1971, and this is the basic document that defines our organization, the powers, the functions, and essential procedures of the city government, sets out the different elective and appointed offices for our city, the duties thereof. Its purpose is similar to what you'd think about as a constitution for the United States or the state of Nevada, with one small change being that, when you think about a constitution, that's the preeminent document. And city charters are what is known as special laws. And in the state of Nevada, if there's a conflict between a special law or a general law, then the general law would take precedence. So if by some reason one of the state statutes gets amended and the city charter is not amended to be consistent with that, that conflict would be resolved in the favor of the state law, unlike where if you had a conflict with the Constitution would take precedence. But really the document serves as our guiding framework for how our organization is structured. There are two ways that our city charter may be amended. That's either by the legislature or by the vote of the citizens through an initiative petition process. I would note that in the last legislative session, our legislature added to our charter a permanent charter committee. We've had charter committees in the past, but they've been created at the will of the City Council. This is now a permanent charter committee that is charged with meeting every other year prior to the legislative session. They review the city charter to see if any amendments need to be made for the more efficient and effective operation of Reno City government, if there's something in the charter that needs to be amended to be more reflective of our community. And actually that new charter committee, which is appointed by members of the City Council and by members of the legislative delegation that represents Washoe County. So our State Assembly and State Senate delegation from Washoe County appoints members to that. It's a 13-member committee, and they have just begun their work. They meet on Thursday evenings here at City Hall from 6 p.m. Most nights they go till about 10. So they are elbow deep in their work. And really, looking at the charter in its entirety, would encourage any of you who are interested in that city charter to attend one of those meetings. It is a public meeting. There's an opportunity for public comment, and their agendas are posted on reno.gov. So if you're interested in what they're working on any given week, just log on to our website, and that information is there for you. A little bit about powers of local governments in Nevada. We are known as what is a Dillon's Rule state. And Dillon's Rule is a very old law, or a ruling that goes back to the 1800s. And it essentially says, or boil it down here, that local governments only have those powers that have been expressly granted to them by the state legislature. And those powers that are necessarily fairly implied to those expressly granted powers and that are essential to the accomplishment of our declared purpose. So really what it means in simple terms is if the state statute is silent on it or our charter is silent on it, we do not have the authority. So anything that we need to get done, we have to have that granted to us from the state. If it's not in there, then we have to go and ask for it. There's approximately 40 states in the United States that are considered Dillon's Rule states. In the last couple of decades, we have seen some states go to a hybrid version of Dillon's Rule and the next form of local government, which is home rule, which is really where kind of the inverse, that if the state statutes are silent on it, then you have that power. You're the master of your destiny and don't need to request permission from the state legislature. Obviously, if there is something within the statute that is addressed, we're required to, the home rule cities would be required to follow it. But if the statute's silent, then the city has the authority. Really kind of four primary areas of home rule powers, if you will. The structural, again, that's our, how the government is structured, what the elected offices are, what your form of government are. The functional, that's your day-to-day business, how you operate. The fiscal would be your authority to raise and levy revenues, taxes, if you will, and then personnel, how you hire, fire, contract with your employees. And so in each of those, I'm sure you can think of things in our state that are specifically called out in our state statutes, and we are required to operate under those conditions. And if there isn't the authority in the statute, then we have to go seek it if we'd like to do something. Again, really 10 states that are strictly home rule states. As I mentioned, there are some other community states, Oregon being one of them, that has most recently gone to a blended where the local governments are granted some of these home rule powers, functional being one of the primary components. There has been some movement in the last couple of legislative sessions to try and seek functional home rule for communities in Nevada, and unfortunately, in my opinion, we have not been successful in getting that through the legislature. Our form of government, we are a council manager form of government, meaning that we have a representative system where the council hires a professionally trained city manager to oversee the delivery of the public services. The mayor and the council set the policy, and the city manager and his staff, in our case, implement those decisions. This is the most common form of local government in the United States, and particularly with medium-sized cities, cities such as ours, it is far and away the most common form of local government. You will see that with very small communities, oftentimes they have other forms of government like the strong mayor or what they call a town council form of government. And then in large cities, think about Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, where the mayor also serves as the chief administrator of the local government. Here is a slide which will break down a little more easily for you to see and in the next couple of slides, but this is the structure of our city government for the city of Reno. And you'll see at the very top, the most important part of this is the citizens of our city. And so that's where everything starts from. And we have a number of elected officials that report directly to our citizens. That would be our municipal court. Our city attorney is elected. The mayor and city council, of course. The Washoe County assessor serves as our ex officio assessor, and the Washoe County treasurer serves as our ex officio treasurer. Those are spelled out in our charter. Underneath that, you'll see that there are two employees, if you will, that report directly to the mayor and city council. That is the city clerk and the city manager. And then you also have a number of boards and commissions that report up to the mayor and city council, are appointed by them. I'm sure a number of you are familiar with them. We have our financial advisory boards, our Park and Rec Commission, a number of different citizen groups that serve as an important advisory function to our city council as they go about doing the very important work of setting policy for our community. So you'll see that underneath that, all of the other city departments are under the appointment and direction of the city manager. And with that, so I've kind of covered that top part there. And that under the city manager, we have a number of individuals, myself included as one of those. You'll see that's what we refer to as our executive staff. So myself, Assistant City Manager Bill Thomas, our Director of Finance and Administration, Robert Chisel, who we're hoping will be able to join you a little later, Kate Thomas, our Director of the Office of Management and Budget, and then Fire Chief Hernandez and Police Chief Pitts. And then the other city functions report up through one of those people in the executive team that then report directly to the city manager. Looking forward into the future, when our most recent city council was elected in February of 2013, just a few short months after we had a number of new members join our city council, the council went off-site and held a retreat where they talked about, they as a new city council, what was their new mission, vision, and strategic priorities for this organization and for our community moving forward. And so you'll see there, you're all adults, I'm not going to read them to you, but those are the guiding principles for us as staff and for the city council as we make decisions and we do our daily work. We're wanting to make sure that we're meeting these strategic priorities. And so in implementing this strategic plan, which covers the current fiscal year and the upcoming fiscal year, again, that strategic plan was approved by the City Council. And so following the approval of those, of that mission priorities, and we had internal cross-departmental community teams created for each one of those priorities. The teams established goals and objectives, and then those goals and objectives were presented to our employees for feedback. We fine-tuned those and compiled them into a document, and that document, again, is our guiding principle. It's what we work towards every day, and we need to make sure that if we're, as we conduct our work, that we're doing it in alignment with those. So the departments are currently developing, implementing tactics that will have measurable results to ensure that we are performing and achieving against those priorities. And this is really, it's a big movement for us, if you will. It's a considerable cultural change for our organization, and that we hope that cultural change will move out even into the community. We call it Think Reno. How many here have heard of Think Reno? All right, couple. And really, as I said, it's about culture, and it's about us being innovative, effective, and accountable in everything that we do every day. As we do our work here in City Hall, as we do our work out in the community, as we interface with the citizens that we are here to serve, we should be innovative, effective, and accountable. And I would encourage all of you, if you haven't already, to log on to reno.gov. You'll find out more about Think Reno there. Some of the new ways that we are trying to connect with our community, different than the traditional ways that we've done in the past, getting away from citizens having to come in a public meeting and stand in a forum with bright lights and TV cameras on them for 3 minutes to tell us their ideas, but really going out into the community, meeting the people in their neighborhoods and hearing from them in ways that works for them, creating online ways. We have our Think Reno idea portal where members of the community can, at the time that works for them, you know, mom's gone through a long day, she's dropped the kids off at school, she's gone to work, had a full day at work, gone home, got the kids, went to soccer, made them dinner, helped them with their homework. But you know what? She's got a great idea. She wants to communicate. She wants to contribute to her community. How can she do that? At 2 in the morning, she can log on to our idea portal and share ideas for us. So we're looking at lots of new ways, trying to be innovative. That means we're going to try some stuff that doesn't work. And failure's okay. We would rather we be working at things and trying new things and finding out that they didn't work than not trying and have not found that new way to connect with our community. So we encourage you to learn about those. As you're out in the community, you can be our ambassadors. You wouldn't be here if you didn't care about this city. And so as you're talking to constituents and they have ideas that you think we should know about now, encourage them to use these various tools to communicate with us. I mentioned a little bit about how we interface with our state legislature. It's a very important relationship, being that we are a Dillon's Rule state. As many of you probably know, our legislature only meets every other year. I think some people would rather that maybe they only met every 10 years, but they do meet every other year for 120 days beginning in the first month in February, which means that they are in session usually right up until the 1st of June of every odd-numbered year. And in that legislative process, we have the ability to seek changes to state legislation that will give us additional or refined or updated authority and power. things that we need to change in state law to help us be more efficient and effective and more responsive to our citizens. And the way that we do that is through bill draft requests, what are affectionately known as BDRs. And by statute, the state allows the city of Reno to submit 2 bill draft requests. And that's a considerable amount fewer than over the last couple of years. If we go back to the 2009 session, we had 5. Then in the 11 session, they weaned us to 3. And now we're down to 2 for the upcoming session. And while that's a little bit frustrating, we just consider it to be another challenge that we're going to rise to. And we've developed relationships with our legislators and ask them to help sponsor bills that will help us, city government, serve their constituents, because our constituents are their constituents. So for our 2 BDRs, we go through a process where we solicit information from all of our different departments, ask them, what changes do you think we need to see made to state law that will help us serve our community better? We bring those forward to the City Council. The City Council will give staff direction on any additional information that they need brought back. We work through the process on that and bring them back to the Council. Our goal is to get them to the Council in a somewhat final version in late July for their approval, so that we can work on getting all of the paperwork done that needs to be done to submit those to the Legislative Council Bureau by September 1st, which is our deadline for submitting bills. As I said, we may also pursue sponsorship of bills through legislators. They have a little bit different timelines, so September 1's not the end of it for us if something comes up after that. But we really do try to pay a lot of attention to this. It's important. It's our opportunity. And once we've submitted those and the legislature is in session, we have city staff that will be down in Carson City every day, all day long, during those 120 days, attending committee hearings, advocating for or against bills that would be either helpful or detrimental to us in providing services to our community. We track and monitor bills. In the last session, at one point we had over 1,200 bills on our tracking list that we were reading through and monitoring and making sure if they were going to help us, making sure they got passed, and if they were going to hurt us, making sure that they either got changed or, if they had to, went away. And sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. We do have, during the legislative session, a standing agenda item on the council agenda so that the council is being kept up to date. We're giving them updates, seeking their direction on those big policy issues and forwarding that information down to our state legislators. In addition to that, during the interim, when the legislature's not in session, we spend time monitoring interim legislative committees, regulations that are being adopted. One of the things that's been in the news quite a bit lately is the adoption of the regulations relating to medical marijuana establishments. So that would be kind of an example of how our city staff is still continuing to interface with state government on legislative items, even during the interim. And then we also hold quarterly update meetings with our legislative delegation. Just an opportunity every few months to check in with our senators and assembly people that represent our community, let them know what's going on at the city, things that we're concerned about, things that we're excited about, things that we want their help with. And that's really proven to be a great relationship builder with our delegation, and keep them in touch with city government, and I think has gone a long way in helping us be more successful at advocating for passage of those things that we want, and not so much for the others. And with that, I would answer any questions that you may have about overall city government. Mark.
Are we a house rule state or a village rule state?
I'm going to repeat his question so we capture it for the video. Mark's question is, are we a Dillon's rule state or a home rule state? And the answer is, we are a Dillon's rule state. So we can only do what the state tells us we're allowed to do.
Why did you say we're a home rule state?
If I said that, I made a mistake. We're not a home rule state. We're Dillon's rule.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. If no other questions, then I am pleased to introduce, probably all of you have met him before, but ask him to come up, Chief Hernandez.
Thank you, kids. Good afternoon. My name is Mike Hernandez. I'm the Reno Fire Chief. I probably know most everyone in the room. I'd like to, first of all, thank you for stepping up and going through the political process to become one of our elected officials, and this may very well become your home every other Wednesday. So the very best of luck to all of you. And before I begin, I just want to touch briefly, Cadence didn't mention it, but we as department directors, we are very fortunate. We have an outstanding leadership team with Andrew Klinger and Cadence and Bill Thomas. They allow us to do our job in a very effective way. They encourage us to think out of the box. And because of that, we've been very successful in some very challenging times. And it's kind of comforting to work under that environment. So with that, not only am I thanking you, but I'd like to thank Andrew and Cadence and Bill for allowing the department heads to do what they do best. I'm going to take a few moments to kind of go over who the Reno Fire Department is, what we do, how we do what we do, and how we are activated and what our mission is, and how we deliver our service. We are considered an all-risk, all-hazards department, and what that basically means is we are prepared to respond to any type of emergency, whether it's a disaster, whether it's a natural or man-made disaster, whether it's an earthquake, a flood, wildland-urban interface fire like we had in the Collin Fire and the Washoe Fire, or a mass casualty incident as we did in the Reno Air Race disaster in 2011. We are a busy department. We respond to about 3,000 calls for service every month. The majority of those calls are emergency medical services calls. We average a structure fire every 3 days. In 2013, we had 6 direct fire-related fatalities. We had 16 individuals that were seriously burned that we rescued and were transported to either a local or a regional medical burn facility. We're a busy department. On an average month, one of our stations averages about 3,000 calls. I'm sorry, about, well, I got that data in front of me, but Station 1 by the ballpark, they're one of the 6 busiest stations in the United States. So our 5 areas of response, of course, our primary mission is fire response, and that's structure, wildland, vehicle, and chemical-related fires. Our second primary mission is emergency medical services, and that really constitutes a bulk of what we do. About 75 to 80% of our calls are EMS-based. We are a part of what we call a 2-tiered emergency medical response system, meaning when that call comes into the 911 system and that dispatcher answers and says, "What is your emergency?" and she says, "My husband just, or my spouse just leaned over and I think he's having a heart attack," we take their name, address, and location and immediately transfer that call to REMSA. They dispatch the medical side, and we dispatch the closest engine response side so that we work hand in hand to touch that patient as quickly and as efficiently and effectively as possible to begin medical invasive therapy to try and correct whatever type of medical challenge they're having. We also operate a hazardous materials response team internally, and we're part of a tri-partner. We partner with the Truckee Meadows Fire Protection District, City of Sparks, and of course the City of Reno, and we have what's called the Triad Hazmat Team. So anything of significance, much like the SWAT team and RPD, we come together and we pool our assets and we handle large-scale chemical emergencies. A bulk of those we handle internally. With respect to rescue, we do fire rescue, swift water rescue, high-angle rescue, confined space, trench, and auto extrication, and specialty rescues. As an example of a specialty rescue, we had an incident a couple of weeks back where we had a young lady that worked at a factory processing some products. She got her hair caught in the machinery, and we had to take the machinery apart as opposed to cutting her hair. She was okay, but that's an example of the type of specialized rescue services that we're capable of delivering. And lastly, our community risk reduction, commonly referred to as our Fire Prevention Bureau, is in charge of code enforcement, inspections, plans review, safety education, juvenile fire setter intervention, and of course senior services outreach. Nationally, statistics show us that our highest incident of fire-related deaths and fire-related incidences are related to our senior citizen population. specifically slips and falls, and of course fire-related issues. It's not uncommon for an individual to put a pan of oil for baking on the oven. They get a phone call, they get distracted, they forget about that, and pretty soon their kitchen's on fire. The reason we target children or school-age children is because national data has shown that if you can capture children between the 3rd grade and the 5th grade and teach those fire-safe behaviors, they have the highest rate of remembering those type of educational outreach programs throughout their adult life. I mean, we all remember Stop, Drop, and Roll. So, and that began at the 3rd grade level. An example of our senior services, several years back, it was our council direction for our department to look for ways to engage in our senior population. We did develop a program called the Gatekeeper Program. We routinely respond via emergency medical calls to senior citizens in our community. And although there may not be an immediate life threat or an immediate fire threat, we will notice those individuals that could be or could be potential candidates for Washoe County Senior Services. So we have a mechanism in place to refer them to Washoe County Senior Services. They follow up with a visit to see if they're candidates for referral to other outside agencies and programs. And of course, we follow up within a week or two to make sure that that person is okay, they're on their meds, and that type of thing. It's kind of a broad view of our city. This is broken up into several other maps. Excuse me. The red dots that you see are City of Reno fire stations. The other dots in the outline area, the green dots, those will be either Truckee Meadows Fire Protection District stations or Volunteers or Sierra Fire Protection District. But that's kind of a good indicator that shows you how our city is kind of stretched out and laid out in kind of a very unique fashion. That's a kind of a close-up of our northern core part of our district. It kind of slices the city from the McCarran Loop northward. You see station number 9, which is instead. Then as you come down, you see station 10, station 2, station 8. Station 19 is in Somerset. That station gets a lot of attention because that's one of the stations that we routinely brown out for staffing reasons. That's also the station that has the lowest call volume in the entire city, to the tune of about 150 calls a year. That's the southern end of our city. Again, the red dots or the red squares indicate City of Reno fire stations. Where you see the green dot that's labeled number 14, that's a Truckee Meadows fire station. Just to the right of that is our new Station 12, which is at Steamboat and Veterans. That is currently open and operational, but we will have our formal grand opening on April the 4th and then a community-wide open house on April the 5th. I'm very proud of that station. It's a beautiful station. We leveraged development dollars to build that station. The net cost to the citizens will be very minimal at the end of the project. I mentioned that we're a busy station. Again, last year we ran just right at 37,000 calls for service. Of those, about 2% were fire calls, 586. A bulk of those calls were medical calls. We had a significant number of hazardous materials calls. And then we have those calls that we simply can't kind of classify, and we call those our other or good intent. A lot of times there's smoke scares. Somebody's barbecuing in their backyard and gets out of hand. They're burning their meat, and it produces a pretty good column of smoke. It's not really a fire, so we kind of lump those into the other category. We'll get little kids that get their heads caught in the banisters of their stair rails and those kind of things. So we track those, but that's where we categorize those calls for service. Just kind of a snapshot of our budget. Going back to 9-10, we were right at $49 million. We were consolidated at that time. Because of economic conditions, we reduced our budget in 10-11 to $45 million. We applied for 10 positions during the 11-12 budget cycle. We received $1.3 million. That was for 10 positions, and that also marked the beginning of deconsolidation during 12 and 13. We received a grant for 64 positions, and that equated to $8 million. As we move forward, our current budget is $41 million, and we have currently applied for a second SAFER or a third SAFER grant, and that is going to be for 50 positions. So we're slowly weaning ourselves off of our federal dependency for our staffing. What does that mean? Well, we currently employ 266 full-time employees. A bulk of those employees are assigned to the emergency operations side of the fence, which is the firefighters or the boots on the ground. We have 238 individuals assigned to emergency operations. We have 11 individuals in our Fire Prevention Bureau. We currently man 3 safety and training individuals, 1 per shift. We have 5 individuals assigned to our Fleet Services and Maintenance Division, and we have 9 people in administration. We currently have 14 stations, which equates to 14 fire trucks. We actually have 4 truck companies, 2 that we keep, and the mayor calls them the hook and ladder. Those are the large trucks with 100-foot aerials. We currently keep 2 fully operational 24/7. We keep 2 in reserve, and we staff those as needed based on threat and risk. We have 2 two-person rescue vehicles, 1 that we staff as needed, and 1 that we constantly staff. So you'll see that it's sort of a large pickup truck, and you'll see those typically responding to medical calls. And again, we operate 24/7, 365. Contrary to what a lot of people think, we don't sit around and play dominoes all day long. We actually do a significant amount of training to the tune of about 300 hours per person per year, but it kind of breaks out. Our special operations folks, that's the urban search and rescue, water rescue, and the hazardous material folks, average about 8 hours per month per person. On the structural firefighting side, they're required to have 4 hours per person per month throughout the year, including two drills that we do annually at night. On the EMS certification side, they're required to have 2 hours per month per person throughout the year. We recertify our EMTIs every 2 years. And then we have specialized training with respect to officer development, captain's training, our engineers. Those are the folks that actually drive the fire truck. We want to make sure that they know how to pump and how to utilize. It's a very complex piece of machinery. We want to make sure that they don't do something they shouldn't do. And then we have specialized training, everything from how to write reports, customer engagement, customer service, how do we interact with Mrs. Smith, how are we tracking our data, things of that nature. So how are we activated? With the rare exception where somebody actually runs up to a fire station and bangs on the door and says there's been an accident a block away, 99.9% of our calls are routed through the 911 dispatching system. And if you've ever had to call 911, the first question they ask you is, hello, this is 911, what is your emergency? And the call taker kind of sifts through what you tell her. My husband just fell over, he clutched his chest, and I don't know what's wrong with him. Well, that would indicate a medical call. They would dispatch fire, and they would push that call to REMSA. There's been a shooting. Well, that would require an ambulance, fire, and police. Or there's been a robbery or burglary. So the dispatchers determine where that call goes. There are often times when the dispatching system gets calls where they frankly don't know who should get that call, and typically when that occurs, they call the fire department. As an example, a couple of weeks back, we had an individual that called and said his arm was chewed off by a werewolf. And so that, a werewolf, yeah. And so we had, we were dispatched, and we pushed the call to REMSA, and of course RPD showed up, and it was one of those type of things. We've had an individual that had his finger stuck in his spare tire, the little lug nut hole. He put his finger there and it got it stuck, and his finger started to swell. He couldn't get his finger out, and he was Spanish speaker, and he didn't have a cell phone. There was at the Costco parking lot. We showed up, and we kind of, well, how are we going to get his finger out? And we basically decided the best thing to do was take the tire off the rack of the back of his pickup truck and transport him, tire and all, to the hospital. So those are the kind of unique calls that don't fit in a nice, neat little box, but those are the type of calls that we respond to when we can't figure out who to send. So what's our future? What is our goals for the next 24, 36, 72 months? Pursuant to our council direction, community engagement is a very, very high priority item, specifically with respect to seniors. We will aggressively pursue grants to augment our equipment, our staffing, and our training. We will continue to enhance and support our special operations team. Again, that's the hazardous materials response team, our urban search and rescue team, and our swiftwater response team. And we are, and we will continue to enhance our high-profile customer service-based organization. We want to engage with Mrs. Smith. We want to make sure that when we show up for a medical call or a fire call, we do everything we can and that we go over and above more than just putting the fire out. We routinely will follow up the day after and the day after to make sure that they're okay. We've answered all their questions. We've done everything we can to deliver the highest level of service that we can possibly deliver to our customers. And, just a few examples. We've had individuals that were visitors in town. They were getting ready to board an airplane. Individual had chest pains. They realized that, they were going to go to the hospital, and it was serious enough that our crews recognized that they were probably going to be here for a while. So our crews took the initiative to get with the airline representative and say, can we get their luggage? Because they're obviously going to be here a while, and there's nothing worse than living in your clothes for 2 or 3 days. So they took the initiative to get the luggage off the Southwest Airlines flight. They threw it in the back of the fire truck, and they delivered it to Renown Medical Center, and the family was very appreciative. So we look for those type of opportunities to engage in our citizens when we meet them and they're really having a bad day. So that's kind of where we are, where we're going, how we're funded, how we're staffed, and with that, I'll take any questions. Mac, you had a question for me? No. Great. All right. Yes, Mark.
What is an EMTI?
Okay. The question is, what is an EMTI? In the emergency medical side of the fence, there are 3 basic certifications. You have your EMT basic. And that's a very minimal level of first aid. Right, and then you have the next level, which is an emergency medical technician intermediate, and then you have the emergency medical technician paramedic. So we are just under the paramedic level of certification.
What's the difference between EMT and why is it called EMT paramedic?
Okay, what is the difference between an EMT intermediate and an EMT paramedic? And basically, it's the type of skill and emergency care that you're able to deliver. As an example, a paramedic can start IVs, they can intubate a patient, and the biggest thing is they're able to assess that patient and determine if certain medications are warranted, and they can look at that patient and say, this person needs sodium bicarb. So they can grab that, they can put it into a syringe, and they can actually inject that into the individual, whereas an intermediate cannot do that level of care.
Different in California, because when I was in California, I could start an IV.
California, most states follow the same standard protocols. So you may have been called an EMT, but if you were able to start an IV, you're most likely a paramedic.
I was going to school to be a paramedic.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're still looking for the werewolf, so if you find him, will you let us know, please? My name is Mac Venzon. I'm one of 2 deputy chiefs for the Reno Police Department. Chief Pitts sends his regrets. He couldn't be here either. He's dealing with a medical issue with his father. So I'll be here covering tonight, or today, give you kind of an update and kind of a snapshot of the Reno Police Department. Start with a kind of a historical snapshot of the PD. Back in about 2009, 2010, we had a reduction in budget of about $10 million down to about $52.6 million. We are not unique in that respect. Many cities during the economic downturn, the recession, faced the same issues we did. We had a reduction of grant funding by about 60% during that time period as well. Again, not unique in our field. We all experienced kind of the same thing. Currently, we have 305 sworn officers, or 305 sworn positions in the department, down from 383 in 2009. So we took a pretty significant hit in sworn personnel, which required us to do a little bit of restructuring, and I'll talk about some of that restructuring here in a future slide. Our civilian personnel went down about half of what we had before. And during that time period, we reduced our executive staff. At one point, we had 6 deputy chiefs and 1 chief of police. Over a period of time, as we reduced that staff to save that money and push that money down into the organization and keep our patrol division really strong, we reduced executive staff down to 2 deputy chiefs and 1 chief of police, which is what we currently have now, and 1 commander to work in between that lieutenant deputy chief rank. During that time period, we closed the Stead substation which was a substation up there instead for officers to write in, for our citizenry to make reports, and what have you. We also closed the downtown substation, the downtown police substation, which was at the bowling stadium. We've since reopened that with a lot of help from city staff. Reopened a substation in the downtown district at the old city center bus depot. So that building to the south, there's two buildings there. The south building is now a substation for reports and what have you. Calls for service have remained pretty consistent during that time, 135,000 calls per year for service. What's kind of unique about that, and what's unique about the Reno Police Department, is of those 135,000 calls, only about 60% of them are generated by calls for service from an individual who requests the police to come. The remaining 40% of those are self-initiated calls. And what does that tell you? What does that tell us? Is that our cops are out there doing work. They're out there doing proactive work. They're out there trying to do what they can to keep the community safe and looking for things. They're not just waiting for reactive type of police work where they answer calls for service and wait for the next call to come in. So of those 135,000 calls, about 40% of them or so are self-initiated calls for service where the officer initiates the activity. We patrol about 105 square miles in the city of Reno. Here's an organizational chart of the city of Reno, and I'll break it down for you, much like some of the other organizational charts you've seen. But you had the chief of police, and when Assistant City Manager Matijevich was up here, she showed you the different department heads. That's Chief Pitts as our department head. And then we're broken down into two divisions, the Operations Division and the Administrative Support Division. The Operations Division, headed up by Deputy Chief Tom Robinson, is basically what you would think of as the uniform division. And that includes everything from patrol, traffic, anybody basically who works in a uniform with the exception of the gang unit falls under this Operations Division. You move over to the Administrative Support Division, and you have regional operations. And we'll talk a little bit more about regional operations and how we've kind of structured those here in a minute. But those include things like gangs, street crimes, repeat offender, things like that. You have the Investigations Division or Detective Division, and then Administrative Services, which is budgeting, all of the other administrative stuff that doesn't really encompass what you would traditionally think of as police work. Our Internal Affairs Division, which is the office that polices the police, if you will. They do investigations on our own people. And then we have, as of about a year ago, actually almost exactly a year ago, stood up what we call the Northern Nevada Regional Intelligence Center. The NRIC, as we call it, is a function of what you used to think of as a fusion center. And if you're familiar with the fusion center, we ran into some issues with the fusion center. It was very, very tightly regulated. It was really it stemmed from homeland security type of events, terrorism type of events. It became frustrating for us, and in cooperation with the Sheriff's Department, very frustrating because it was regulated so much so that we couldn't push out a lot of information to the street cops. It was regulated as to what we could release and why. If it wasn't homeland security related, we couldn't push it down through the organizations. So Chief Pitts, Sheriff Haley, Chief Allen from Sparks, at the time Chief Kiefer, opted to do away with the Fusion Center and really work on intelligence sharing, information sharing among all organizations. So what the Northern Nevada Regional Intelligence Center is now is really a place where they collect a lot of data and push data out to the patrol officer on a daily basis to make sure that we're all informed about what's going on region-wide, not just jurisdiction by jurisdiction. It was about 3 years ago or so, and then in relation with the strategic approach that Assistant City Manager Matijevich came up with or told you about, we had one of those 4 priorities. Sorry, it wasn't yours, was it? But she told you about it. Okay. One of those 4 goals was safe and livable neighborhoods. Out of that goal of safe and livable neighborhood, we came up with about 38 objectives. To date, I'm proud to say that 34 of those 38 objectives have been implemented. They're being evaluated for improvements, and they'll be consistently evaluated. 4 of the 38 objectives are still being designed and prepared for implementation at this point. They include things like a youth volunteers and service program. We're bringing in students from the University of Nevada to work as volunteers in the police department. That's one of those 4 objectives that we're working towards still, with 3 other ones remaining. What you also see there is a plan to really look at our regional partnerships, our regional operations within the entire community, not just within the city of Reno. And what does that mean for us? We have, let me give you an example, our street crimes unit. Our street crimes unit consists of 4 detectives, or 4 officers, and 1 sergeant. Well, Sparks has the same thing. County has virtually the same thing. So we're looking at things like, how do we regionalize a unit like that to make them more effective? Oftentimes they're chasing the same crooks. Our crooks don't care so much about jurisdictional boundaries. So we're looking at ways to better provide services to the entire community by regionalizing some of our units and making sure that we can work in a more cohesive capacity to get the job done and keep the community safer. There's a lot on this slide. The foundations of the Reno Police Department include community-oriented policing. For at least the 17 years that I can remember, the Reno Police Department is really, really strongly engaged in the philosophy of community-oriented policing, keeping our community and our police department together, keeping them as one, making sure that we interact with the community and work on problems at a neighborhood level. So if there are neighborhood problems that maybe don't necessarily rise to the level of crime problems, but they're still neighborhood problems for our community members, then we'll work in conjunction with the community to try to solve those neighborhood problems. As of about the last 4 or 5 years, we've launched into what's called intelligence-led policing. A lot of times you'll hear it called evidence-based policing, and that's really a function of data. Looking at data, consistently looking at crime trends, and deploying our personnel in relation to what the trends are at the time. That is fairly new for us, and I'm proud to say it's been very, very successful in the police work that our men and women at the Reno Police Department are doing right now. We conduct very often internal surveys, and then annually a community survey. Some of you may have participated in the annual survey, where we called about 509 people in the community to really get a grasp of what people think of the Reno Police Department, how are we doing, what can we change, and we use those surveys to really drive performance in the way that we structure and the way that we deploy our resources. We recently started a symposium on race and policing. There's a lot of information out in the media, out on the internet about racially biased policing. We took that head on and wanted to really speak with the members of our minority community, and we engaged in members of our minority community, people from the faith-based organizations, to truly figure out what it is their concerns are in relation to race and policing, and taking a lot of that information and structuring our training around some of that. Developed a performance scorecard, which again is part of that data thing. Every month we review with all of the managers. We do it weekly at the executive level, but with all managers within the police department. Every month we look at what are we doing well, where are we generating the most calls for service, what data do we have that will allow us to deploy resources to where they need to be on a month-by-month basis. Development and implementation of our guiding principles. So as we started to restructure the police department back in 2009, 2010, we started to ask, what are the things that we need to be very good at, knowing that we're going to reduce staffing? What are the things that need to happen for a successful police department? And 7 of those guiding principles were designed, and currently we have groups that work in these guiding principles and really pushing the culture of the organization up from the bottom, as opposed to us dictating what the culture of the organization will be, or burying our heads in the sand and saying the culture will be what it will be, and there's nothing we're going to do about it. We're really pushing this culture up from the bottom, a grassroots kind of effort to make sure that we're doing the best we can do at everything that we do. When we restructured the organization, one of the priorities that Chief Pitts had, and at the time Chief Pullman had, was to really keep the patrol division strong. So 70% or so of our employees work in the patrol division. And that's really an emphasis for us, is the patrol division, so that when a member of the citizenry picks up the phone, calls 911, and requests a police officer, there is somebody there to answer that call for service. And so we continue to keep the patrol division strong. We did not go as far as what a lot of agencies have done, and as we've talked to other colleagues around the country, a lot of agencies did this hunker down mentality where they moved all of their personnel back to the patrol division and really left a skeleton crew, maybe in investigations, maybe got rid of narcotics and vice and a bunch of traffic divisions, all of those things. We didn't do that entirely, but we did make some reductions in all of those staff to make sure that patrol stayed strong. We established a Chiefs Advisory Board. And it's really a group of individuals in the community, business owners, business leaders, community members who can give some input as to how the police department's running, provide us with some oversight, some problem solving, allows us to build networks in the community, on the backs of these people a lot. They help us a lot. But really what it's done for me personally as a fairly new deputy chief is it's allowed us to look at leadership from the private sector and how do we employ some of those leadership principles into the public sector. So it's been a great program for us as we've ventured through this economic downturn. We've developed a faith-based leadership initiative. We took pastors and bishops from all over the faith-based communities and brought them together and really focused on how do we solve community problems. They really are the eyes and ears of the community. They know a lot about what's happening in the community, and we rely on them to work with us and to help us out. To give you an example of how this faith-based leadership initiative has worked out very well for us, every month we have a meeting of executive staff from all organizations, federal, local, state, and this meeting happens at a breakfast meeting every month. And we brought this faith-based leadership group into there. And this was just before the Sparks Middle School shooting. The faith-based group reached out to the group of executives from all organizations, all law enforcement organizations in the area and said, we're here to help. The Sparks Middle School thing went down. They reached out right away for Sparks PD, the FBI, some of our victim services units really reached out for the faith-based initiative and had them come in and really help out with some of the aftermath of the Sparks Middle School shooting. And again, it happened with the Reno shooting. I talked a little bit about our developments and continuing to develop the performance of our regional law enforcement assets. Some of the regional units that we have, these are units that are comprised of both or all three main agencies in the area, Sparks, Washoe County, Reno PD, with our gang unit, our street enforcement team, the Northern Nevada Regional Intelligence Center I talked to you about, our regional sex offender notification unit, repeat offender program. Those guys are really charged with following and monitoring the worst of the worst criminals in our area. And then we have narcotics interdiction, which is a regional team as well, that look at drugs that are passing into and through our community. As of yesterday afternoon, we started working with a group of regional partners on symposiums and preventing violence in our schools. Many of you may have attended Lieutenant Colonel Grossman's presentation last week. That's just one of the components of this prevention and violence, active shooter type of incidents that we've seen all too often in our community. And so we're working on better ways to respond to those, better ways to handle those particular incidents as they occur, and looking at protocols region-wide about how we respond. Created and implemented a community action officer team. Again, it's not that hunker down mentality, but this community action officer team is a team of about 6 officers with 1 sergeant, and their sole purpose is to look at the highest volume calls for service areas. What areas are creating the highest volume of calls for us? And then they go into those communities and they work with community leaders, they work with apartment complex managers, they work with a bunch of people to try to figure out how do we reduce calls for service? What is the actual root of the problem? They ferret into and drill down into the root of that problem and then try to eliminate that problem. What we've experienced from that is 35–40% call reductions that are sustainable reductions for calls for service in those areas with these 6 officers. They've done a phenomenal job and something that we're very proud of and have modeled to a lot of our colleagues around the country about how we're doing it and what we're doing in relation to community action officers and reducing calls for service. improved outreach efforts to assist in reductions of crimes, particularly in the downtown area. And we've had a long, strong focus on the downtown area over the last month or so. But you have units like our Homeless Evaluation Liaison Program, the Mobile Outreach Team, Motel Interdiction Team. These are all teams that are looking at providing resources for our at-risk populations and trying to get them out of the criminal justice system. If you take a serial inebriant downtown who might end up costing the community $1 million over a span of a couple of years because he's in and out of jail, going to the hospital, all of those things that encompass this serial inebriant, we're working toward a more resource-based approach where we get this person some resources and help them to break that cycle of in and out of jail. Trained all of our personnel in culture, diversity, leadership processes, and the expectations that we as an organization and that we as a city have in relation to those things within the police department. Again, we could bury our heads and wait for the culture to develop. Our trend is to maybe make sure that we can manage that culture, make sure that the culture grows organically, but it's healthy. It's a healthy culture. Our strategic approach. We've developed a 360 blueprint with the Washoe County School District. That's the title of the program, and it focuses on providing resources to our children, our future. We engage with them on some reading and relationship and math programs to make sure that they have at least a leg up in becoming successful. What we've learned through this research on this 360 Blueprint program, kids that don't learn to read by the second or third grade are much, much more likely to end up in jail. That becomes a problem for us in the future. We're going to try to stem that off from the beginning. So the 360 Blueprint is a program that we've focused on with one of the CAO officers in cooperation with the Washoe County School District. The Blue 360 program, not to be confused with the 360 Blueprint program, is a internal means of communication. What we learned through some of our seminars with our people as we started to work on culture and leadership and diversity in the organization was that while we get our 200, 250 emails, return some, send some back out to the men and women of the police department, what we lacked was a lot of face-to-face communication. And we learned this as Deputy Chief Robinson and I kind of went around cohort to cohort throughout the organization to find out what is it that you want to know? What is it that you're not getting from executive staff? And it was really communication. So every quarter we invite members of the staff to send in what it is they want to know about. And then every quarter all of us from the executive staff go to every single briefing, touch every single individual within the organization, and make sure that they have the opportunity to ask those questions. We answer the questions that they send in. And we'll take the hard questions right up there in front of everybody. It's really been a great program for us to really open up lines of communication with the men and women of the organization. Annual Citizen Police Academy, I don't know if any of you have attended that. That happens twice a year in cooperation with Washoe County and Sparks PD. We put on a Citizens Police Academy to really inform our citizens about what the job of a police officer entails. We do annual media training to try to train the media a little bit about what it is we do and to help them to really ferret out what it is they want to know, what kind of information they want to deliver, and what resources they have available to them to get that information out to the public. And then building our volunteer capacity. I talked about the youth volunteers in policing. And then, of course, our SAVE program, which is a fantastic program, about 100 SAVE volunteers that work in the program, saving us right around $1.4, $1.5 million in man-hour time that we don't have to use with police officers that the SAVE volunteers offer up for us. You might see them out here. Those of you who are regulars to City Hall will see them at the front desk. They'll work at the front desk of some of the other substations, and they spend a lot of time out in the patrol area just kind of keeping an eye on things and reporting back in what they see, leaving them out of harm's way, but allowing them to be eyes and ears for us as well. So where do we go from here? We're attempting to slowly grow the organization again. I don't know that we'll get back to 383 anytime soon. In fact, I know we won't get back to 383 anytime soon. But we're attempting to grow the organization slowly, trying to build that capacity of the organization to handle anything and everything that comes our way, and making sure that we have an organization that is ready to serve the community that they swore to serve. Improving technology as it relates to crime fighting. What we found through our intelligence-led policing program is that technology is huge. We had one officer who is very, very bright, former computer experience guy, developed what we call the mobile officer guide. Every officer carries a smartphone now, and so this mobile officer guide is available to them, and it has all kinds of resources, all kinds of information to include wanted information for wanted individuals. A lot of things go into the mobile officer guide, so we're working on this technology and how do we leverage technology in light of our reduced staffing. I talked about our intensified efforts to improve the downtown area, the recent expansion of the special assessment district in the downtown area, or proposed expansion of the downtown district, and then we're running what we're calling surge operations and this walking program. And the walking program has been real exciting. We've had a lot of great feedback from our officers and from the community in 8 of these 4-hour assignments. We put guys on foot, guys and gals on foot downtown just to make contact with people, make people in the downtown district feel safe. They see the officers. Their primary mission is not enforcement. Their primary mission is to be ambassadors to the city. They make contact with business owners. I think during that 8-week period, they made something like 1,400 contacts with individuals, several hundred contacts with business owners in the area, and just paying attention to what's going on in the downtown area. And then we take that information back and really focus our efforts on what we need to do downtown. How do we deploy resources downtown? So the outcome of this, we've seen a reduction in the UCR crime rate, the Uniform Crime Reporting rate, of about 3.5% in 2013. Now, that's not really unique to us. A lot of cities have enjoyed a reduction in the UCR rate. Now, UCR rate is kind of archaic way of counting crime. They've been doing it this way with the FBI. We have to report to the FBI 5 top crimes and the resolution of those crimes, closures of cases, what have you. But if you're going to use that method to measure, you might as well use that same measure to measure against. And what we've seen is a 3.5% reduction in crime in 2013. Improving community relations. Chief Hernandez talked a little bit about this improvement of community relations. Assistant Manager Matijevich talked about community relations. It's really about reaching out from the city of Reno to the community. Last night, Mayor Cashel was in here and said, there is no I in this team. It's all we. And we all have kind of that same goal of reaching out to the community, making sure that our community becomes engaged in local government. The community becomes engaged in police services and what the police do. I talked about our command staff, which is much smaller, but really has developed over the past 4 or 5 years to be much more diagnostic in nature and really looking at how do we deploy resources? What do we do with taxpayer resources? And are we effectively utilizing taxpayer resources? Our guiding principles that we talked about have become everybody's business. Again, a grassroots effort to kind of grow the organization from the bottom up, looking at individual ideas, running them through a committee, a team of individuals led up by a lieutenant who can kind of move some of the barriers out of the way for the individual officer who has an idea. They plug this idea into the appropriate group, and then it's pushed up through the organization. It's not reliant on executive staff to come up with all recommendations and all ideas and push them down. Rather, we're pushing them from the bottom up. Improving customer service through education, different crime reporting options. You have several ways to report crimes now. You can go to a substation at your convenience. You can do it online. Or you can call and have an officer come out and take your crime report. We're in the process of trying to work our community service officers, our CSOs as we call them, back into the community and letting the community interact with them and making them more responsive for what we call cold crimes, crimes that need a report taken but don't necessarily need a uniformed officer there right away. So we're looking at reporting options. And then our detective division is working on a victim-centric approach. I can tell you from experience that in this business, you tend to look at cases as case numbers. And when you get to where you start to look at cases as case numbers, instead of looking at the victim behind those case numbers, your customer service goes down. Your level of customer service goes down. We're revamping that and looking at a very victim-centric approach, from the time the crime occurs to the time that they get to the court system and all the way through. And how do we stay with this victim all the way through so the victim is updated on where their case is, what's happening, where it's going to go next, what we need to solve the case, and being honest with them. A lot of cases, just not enough information to solve. So we implore the community, the victim, to help us out with some of that investigation. If they learn anything new, to make sure that they call us and that they have somebody that they can talk to. Our regional efforts are impacting street crime, gang crime, repeat offender crime, and we're consistently looking at those operations and figuring out how better to improve regional efforts throughout the area. And that's all I have. Questions? Go ahead, Mark.
I'm sick of asking all the questions. What's in Neil Road?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
What's at Neil Road?
The question is, what is Neil Road?
What's that at?
The Neil Road substation?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So the question was, what's at the Neil Road substation? The south substation, the Neil Road substation, is basically a front desk option for people to come in and make reports at the Neil Road substation, so they don't have to come down to the downtown police station. They can go to a substation that's closer to their community, and that's primarily what happens at the Neil Road substation. There's also an office area in the back for officers to write their reports, so they don't have to come all the way back to the main police station to write their reports and do the work that they have to do outside of their regular patrol functions. Other questions? None? Okay. Thank you.
You're pretty.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Matt. Usually I'm here with my cohort partner in crime, Robert Chisel, but he is unable to make it. He is in fact-finding for a meeting right now, so he sends his regrets. And of course, now I can't start with my fun joke where we introduce ourselves, tell a little bit about ourselves, and then we tell everybody that we are lovingly referred to as doom and gloom. I'm gloom. So we don't get to tell you a little bit about that joke, but what I will tell you is the Office of Management and Budget and the Finance Department are different entities within the City of Reno's organization. And the reason for that, which is why you would have two of us up here sort of presenting and working together, is because a couple of years ago, probably 3 years ago, it was decided that there should be a separation of duty or a separate set of eyes on both of the functions. You want to have the folks that are planning for the expenditure of the resources and the folks that are tying up the invoices and ticking and tying and doing the auditing kind of in separate functions so that you do have that separation of duty within the organization. It's the way the feds are structured. It's a way that a lot of larger organizations are structured. And so we felt that it was a good idea. It's worked very well. It does require a lot of communication between Robert and myself and his staff and my staff. Jill Olson is here representing the finance department, and she's a rock star, and we are in touch often as far as kind of coordinating, so that we're talking to one another over all of the fiscal issues. So I am Kate Thomas. I am the director of the Office of Management and Budget. We're a small but mighty team that does the fiscal planning for the year ahead for the City of Reno. And I wanted to share with you sort of where we are in the fiscal process so that you can get an idea of how the cycle works and what the policy director's role is in the budget cycle or the annual fiscal process. So if you look at the screen in front of you, you see that we kick off the annual fiscal process with the strategic planning portion. Cadence Matievich alluded a little bit to that when she talked about the council's meeting and having a retreat in early February of this year. And what essentially happened during that meeting was that the council, kind of a newer body at that point, came together and said, okay, what do we want our priorities to be for the year and sort of for the period of time going forward, so that then we could dedicate the resources and the plan to structure around where we want to go as far as achieving those priorities that the policymakers set. So that first section, January, February, is what we call strategic planning. We do some pre-budget building work, but that silo essentially is owned by the city council and the city manager, the process that is involved with that. We then move into, once we have that policy direction, sort of where we are now, which is the budget building. the Office of Management and Budget gets together with all the departments to talk about, okay, now that you have an idea of what needs to be achieved, what is the work plan going to look like that you want to structure around those priorities and how we're going to get there? So with that, of course, comes resource needs, and so we put together the plan or the expenditures that are required to meet those resource needs and achieve those priorities. And we go through and analyze the fees. I mean, the budget process, as I'm sure you are all very aware, is involved with a good amount of what are the revenues that are going to be coming in versus what are the expenditures that need to go out, and oh boy, those two things should really match. So that is the process that we're in right now. We go through a series of workshops. The first one's going to be April 23rd, and then we have 2 in early May, with final adoption of the budget on the 20th of May as required by Nevada revised statutes. It's the 3rd Tuesday in May for local governments. And then, of course, we have to submit our budget document, just like everybody else does, to Department of Taxation at the state by June 30th. So that's where we sit right now. And then once we get the budget developed and the departments go forward and perform their expenditures and meet their goals and do their work as they do so well, we then come through, and the finance piece is kind of that last section, and that is where we do the external fiscal review, where we have the external auditors come in to take a look at all of the occurrences over the past year and perform the audit for the City of Reno. So we look at our internal control framework and decide, okay, how did everything go? What do we need to make changes to? How would we like to do it differently? And then it repeats. So it's kind of one of these Groundhog Day cycles, as I'm sure you're all aware of. These are the council priorities that were set forth on February 4th. They are the priorities that we operate under until we are given direction to do otherwise, and so it's what you see largely the department plans built around this structure. And again, I won't read them to you. I know you saw them in an earlier slide. So this is the City of Reno budget as depicted by a pie chart. The one piece that you'll often be focused on is obviously the city's general fund. You know, everybody always says we have a $160 million budget, and they're often referring to the general fund, which is the piece that provides those public-facing services like police and fire and so forth. But there are some important pieces to note, like the enterprise fund, which is where our sewer fund lives, and of course debt service, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So. We talk a little bit about the expenditures and kind of what the city spends money on. It's also important to focus on where we get those resources, and so we pay very much attention to the revenues that the city brings in on an annual basis. Property tax, we call it kind of a three-legged stool. If you look at the kind of the 3 big pieces of revenue that come into the city, we've got the property taxes, which obviously everybody is aware of, and where those have gone over the past couple of years, which has kind of caused what we needed to do as far as reductions in expenditures. We also have the licenses and permits as one of the other franchise fees sort of section of the three-legged stool, and then living within intergovernmental revenues is C-tax or our sales tax piece, which we're also going to go into a little bit more detail on as well. So you can sort of see what the budgeted revenues are coming in, and there are things that play in and out of that. We've got grant funding, federal grant funding, the SAFER grant, which you heard a little bit about, whether our franchise fees are kind of coming in and going out. You know, the franchise fees that the city gets, we've got the trash, we've got the energy franchise fees, we've got gas. Robert gave a good example last night to the group that, you know, we get the telephone franchise fees, but that's sort of dwindling since everybody's probably using one of these instead of a landline these days. So we keep a good eye on what those trends are with revenues around our budget. So talk a little bit about property tax, which is one of those legs of the stool and one of the key revenues that comes in for us. We have, as you can see, a general fund portion of the property tax is the biggest section. We've got some others that are equally important but not as large. And you can see sort of the trend here, what's happening. The issue for us, obviously, is that there's a cap on the amount of tax that can be collected, and so there's always going to be a little bit of a lag in where our revenues come in based on the fact that there is a calculated cap on how we can pull those revenues in, and then of course when the economy starts recovering, we have to make up for those lags, and so it takes a little bit. You know, everybody thinks, oh, the economy is recovering, we've got property values that are going up, but we as the local government don't see those revenues coming in as quickly as the economy itself is recovering. C-tax or sales tax is a been a great thing for us this year. It's coming in strong. You can see the line depicted there that we're finally kind of climbing up out of the hole as far as our revenues are concerned around sales tax. There's basically 5 components to the sales tax, or the C tax. It's the consolidated tax, which we call it. We've got the basic city county relief tax, which are sales. We've got cigarette tax. We've got the liquor tax, which is hard liquor. Robert always likes to point out that if you're going to go out and buy something, don't buy beer. Make sure you buy the hard liquor, which directly impacts our ability to pull in those revenues. Real property transfer tax, and then we've got the DMV, or the motor vehicle tax. You can see sort of the trends, what it looks like for us over a year's worth of time. December obviously is a strong month for us with all of the great spending that we do here in the economy. The online sales has really kind of given us, last year we had a rough December as far as C-Tax, which is our biggest month, is concerned. We thought a lot of that had to do with online sales. There were some other factors involved. December came in strong for us. We get a 2-month lag in that, so we just got December sales tax information. So we're a couple months behind when we pull in those revenues. But want to remind you, now that you're drinking liquor, we want you to not order it online unless you do it from Amazon, because Amazon is now giving us tax as of January 1. So kind of a little look of C-Tax for you. Here is what it looks like year over year versus month over month. You can see that in the heyday, we were pulling in a good amount of sales tax. We are way down comparatively to where we were, and expenditures, we'll talk a little bit about that, have not decreased to the greatest amount that we have seen the decreases in C-Tax. That's why you saw layoffs. That's why you saw us need to make some cuts and reductions in service, because we really have to ebb and flow with the way that these revenues are coming in for us. So talk a little bit about expenditures now that we've covered a few of the revenues. What we do in the Office of Management and Budget, and of course with Finance, we on a monthly basis take a look at every department, the large departments, and even the small ones, and sit down and say, okay, where are you year to date right now as far as your expenditures? How is department spending looking? This is a slide that we presented to the City Council at the February planning session to kind of show, look, we're tracking right along where we need to be. Nobody's going crazy with themselves at this point, but because of how contracts are structured, or some spring is a heavier purchase time for, say, Parks and Rec or whatnot, we're going to see a little bit of ebbing and flowing. Not everybody's going to meet that line, but we keep a really close look as far as department spending goes to make sure that we are on target, so there are no end-of-the-year surprises, and consequently no surprises in the audit process. Here's a look at our general fund expenditures overall, and you can kind of see, you saw those big dips in revenues coming in for the sales tax. You see the expenditures are not such a dramatic shift, so we really have to kind of figure out how are we going to weather the next storm, as far as not making further reductions, as we've already cut pretty deeply with the services that we've delivered, and the staffing. We're a third of our staff essentially gone. So one thing that's really important to us is reserves. We have to make sure that we are balanced and budgeted and well equipped to weather the next economic downturn, because we will have one. We'll talk a little bit more about this at the end of the presentation, but ending fund balance is sort of our top priority as your fiscal staff at this point. We can maintain up to an 8.3% ending fund balance without that additional reserve being targeted for collective bargaining purposes. So that's 1 month's operating. It's not a lot of rainy day stash away in the bank for us to weather a significant downturn. So we have to be mindful that we've got not a lot of leeway as far as reserves are concerned. We have been holding at right around 4% for the last several years. Obviously, that's the minimum required by state law that you have to budget for as a percentage of your overall budget. We haven't been able to be above that, but things are looking better, and we're cautiously optimistic that we will have a larger reserve level going into the next budget cycle. So that's been a challenge that we have risen to meet, and one that couldn't be more important for us, because in order to deliver services such as police, fire, public works, parks, all of the services that we offer, we have to have adequate reserves so that those items don't get further reduced the next time that we see reductions in our revenues that are coming in. Here's a little bit more of a graphic depiction of where the reserve levels have gone. Again, they're a percentage of the budget, so this isn't necessarily over the 8.3%, but at the same time you can see that as a proportionate to the budget size, they've taken quite a dip. I'm going to talk very briefly about bonds. This is sort of uncharted territory for me. Robert Chisel's section, he knows this thing inside and out, but wanted to give you at least a little bit of information. Obviously, we can get more information to you if you have further questions as we go through the presentation, but since I'm filling in for him, wanted to give you some overall points, and that being that most of our bonds, there's several types of bonds that the city holds. You've seen some articles in the paper on these as of late, but most of the bonds that we have are revenue bonds, and Jill, jump up here and, tackle me if I say anything that's completely out of line. But we have about $332 million in revenue bonds versus the others at about $167 million. And the thing to remember is that with general obligation bonds, you've got the backing of the full faith and credit of the city. So that is where you're a little bit more exposed, I guess, if you will, as far as the city is concerned, because you've got the backing of the general fund and the city itself, versus a revenue bond, which has a pledged revenue source behind it. And it's really not as risky for the city at all, because that's what's been pledged to it, is the revenues coming in. And we've got some of those bonds that we're currently looking to restructure, or have restructured some of our bonds, because we need to draw down the amount of outstanding debt that we have. And our finance department has done a fantastic job of recently bringing forward, taking advantage of interest rates and so forth, the restructuring of some of our bonds you may have seen in the city council meeting. We've got the event center, the retrack, some of the SAD bonds that generate savings, some of them for the general fund. We're up to about $5 million, I think, in savings from the restructuring of those bonds. So we're being aggressive in taking a look at the bond portfolio that we have and making changes to it so that we can be stronger as a city. But again, the takeaway message there was that the revenue bonds, which we have the most of, as you can see here, is really sort of the least exposure that the city has. So, though I know a lot of folks are focused on the fact that we have this really large bond or debt portfolio, but, we look at some of the things that were necessary to bond for, like the fact that we used to have a train running through downtown Reno, kind of stopping the entire traffic flow and whatnot before we decided to put in the retrack project. We've got, the Reno Event Center and other key decisions that previous policymakers have made, saying, okay, you know what, these are the things that we want to do as far as the city, as far as capital improvements, and to go out to bond for them. So yes, it's large, yes, it's stunning, but it's being well managed, I can assure you that. And when there are opportunities to reduce it, those are being taken. And obviously you haven't seen any major projects go out for bonding in recent years. Here's another look at those bonds by type. You can kind of see where they sit and where they've been trending over the past few years. You can see there was sort of you can see where the heyday happened and sort of the spike in growth. But we, like I said, we're aggressively managing those, and you can see that they're actually starting to go down. So what I want to talk a little bit about is where we're headed financially. Obviously, we want to put ourselves in a position so that we can do the things that, everybody is so actively looking to do, as far as you coming in and being policymakers. You have, I'm sure, big visions for what you want to see Reno become. For us, we call ourselves Debbie Downer. We say, okay, before we get to do any of those fun, sexy projects, we have to make sure that we're fiscally stable. And to get there, we have a given set of priorities that we would like to achieve. So we're very, very dedicated, and it's not very, like I said, it's not very sexy, but it is what it is, and it's absolutely necessary. Again, we talked about reserves. Our goal is to get up to 1 month's operating, or 8.3%. Something that's been in the news lately and is a really big deal for us as far as an outstanding unfunded liability is other post-employment benefits, or OPEB. Depending on the bargaining contract that you have or the type of employee that you are guaranteed medical coverage, sometimes for the rest of your life, sometimes to the age of 65. That is a pretty significant liability for the city. Our recent actuarial told us that should we sort of close the gate right now, to take care of all of the current and retired employees that we have is a $210 million liability for the city, of which we are not putting any money away currently. So we are on what is called a pay-go system. We're sort of paying for those liabilities as they come due every year. Our goal as your fiscal staff is to get to the point where we're funding normal, which is the amount of money necessary to stop that liability from growing, but you're not actually making a dent in the liability. You're just sort of stopping, finger in the dike, I guess, if you will. At that point, you're not reducing liability. So it's baby steps, but and this, let me just say, is not a problem that's indicative to Reno. It is a problem that is very significant for most local jurisdictions and a lot of jurisdictions all over the country. And it was a significant issue for Detroit per se. So it's something that we're pretty dedicated to fixing. No longer will it be swept under the rug. It's something that we're like, okay, look, we need to do something. So our first step was to establish a trust. And in that trust, we can put the dedicated resources as they become available, of course, after the reserves are met, so that they can be set aside for just that specific purpose, which is satisfying that liability for our employees for future or for current employees and those that have retired. I mean, we made a promise to them, this is what you're going to get, and it's up to us to make good on that promise. Workers' compensation, I think we're up to $39 million in outstanding liability on that issue. You can see we've got some significant hurdles that we need to achieve or overcome, but we're getting there, and you eat an elephant a bite at a time. So, and then of course capital maintenance. We've got significant progress being made on some of our items. The Northwest Pool is getting a new roof. That's a big step for us after a long drought period of not really doing much. But we recognize that there are significant needs that are out there, and we have to start funding those or setting aside the funding for those, or else those are items that are going to come due unexpectedly, and we call them budget busters. So obviously we want to start planning for the future maintenance and care of our infrastructure so that we don't come into that situation. So we're putting everything in order, our ducks in a row to plan for the next economic downfall. Like I said, we're fully expecting to see one, just don't know size or scope or timing on it. But we're looking at modifications to everything we can within the organization to make sure that we are, on the right track, looking under every rock, everything from do we need to do something with our health insurance to kind of tighten that up? How is our cash flow looking? Because we come into a really difficult period at the beginning of every fiscal year. We get July 1, everyone's like, yay, we've got our new budgeted amount of, X to spend over the year. But the problem is we don't get property taxes in till September. So we've got this kind of dry period where we're like, okay, we need to kind of hunker down. Nobody order any pens, nobody order any paper. We've got to get through payroll essentially at this point until we can sort of get into the point where we're getting our revenues in regularly. So cash flow is something that we've had to pay a whole lot of attention to. Having adequately funded reserves obviously helps us with that. So I think I've covered a lot of stuff, and I've done it fairly quickly. I wanted to leave time for questions that you might have about any of our fiscal issues, and obviously if you have further questions around the budget, we've got the document online. So a lot of good information for those of you that have not taken a look at the budget online yet. There's a lot of really good sort of remedial budget information in the beginning that outlines, the city's fiscal structure, kind of what the different funds are, the definitions of those funds and whatnot. So be sure to take a look online. One of my crackdowns on budgeting was we used to print a whole bunch of budget books and have them sitting around. So we offer you electronic copies because we don't have a lot of hard copies should you need them. But it's a great resource, and I recommend taking a look at it if you can't sleep.
Thank you. It was a great presentation.
Thank you.
You didn't say exactly how much the capital maintenance liabilities were.
Because that's a tough one. We have actively planning for in our larger departments, the Public Works Department, Parks Department, and others. What we have is a process where they kind of keep that infrastructure management piece where they know what is necessary. That feeds into our annual capital improvement plan program so that they come forward and say, okay, this is what we need because these are the items in priority order. So at this time, I couldn't render a guess. John could probably tell us maybe what his outstanding capital liability is, but it's a tough thing because it's big. You need the resources to go in and analyze what, those things that haven't been paid attention to over the years. So it's a really good question, but I couldn't even render a guess at this point.
I just did a presentation to City Council last meeting, went over the sewer fund, kind of things we're at, and just to get an idea in the sewer fund, well over $300 million in the sewer fund. However, we do have money coming in to pay for those, and we're about a $20 to $25 million a year able to do projects, so we're going to eat those up. But that's one area that it is funded. Street fund, it's not funded real well. So we have some pretty good sized liabilities there, and then it depends on what you want to add into that. Do you throw in, ADA sidewalks as part of, all those things that go with the streets? That's going to add to it. Our facility maintenance, we've got, some pretty big deficits there. So I generally do have all those numbers. I just don't have them in my head.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. Can I ask one more question?
Of course.
Is it possible to get your PowerPoint?
Yeah, there's no problem with that at all. The question was, is it possible to get the PowerPoint for those that don't have the microphone? Yeah, we'd be happy to get that for you. I will. Yeah. That's fine. We can repeat the question.
You may or may not know the answer. How does the current state of PERS fit into your scheme of unfunded liabilities for new employees that are currently
Very good question. So the question was, how does PERS, which is the Public Employee Retirement System, which is the program that's handled through the state as far as everybody's, retirement, how does that fit into the current city system of unfunded liabilities? Am I understanding your question correctly? Okay. So that is something that the city pays into, and it's managed at the state level. So it's not something that we oversee directly other than contributing to it. And then our various agreements are structured so that should there be an increase in the PERS cost, in a lot of cases, the city's contribution to PERS and the employee's contribution to PERS are split. So I don't know if Kane, I thought you were jumping up to add to that, but so it's something that, like I said, the city pays into PERS. It's a responsibility of us to pay into that system to pay for our employees for our future retirement, but at the same time, it's not something that we actively manage. It's managed at the state level. You want to add to that?
Yeah, I can probably add a little bit more. I mean, I think your question was as far as an unfunded liability for PERS. If I'm remembering correctly, the last there's a number of different actuarial studies that go on with the PERS, just like we do with our OPEB and our workers' comp and others. And actually, the PERS system in Nevada is fairly healthy. Particularly if you ask PERS. They've been pretty aggressive about managing and getting a good return on their money. That is one of the areas where we are not the masters of our own destiny. We are required by statute to contribute, and the PERS board has the authority to raise the contribution rate. So they actually do have more control over being able to manage their unfunded liability, because if they see that all of the various components that go into it, either the contribution rates or the service calculator or the return that they're getting on their investments, if they need to make an adjustment to that, they simply increase the contribution rate, which we then have to react to, if you will. I mean, it's a reaction most times because we don't really know that it's coming. And what they tell us is, okay, today you're paying roughly 25% for non-public safety employees, and I think it's closer to 40 for public safety employees. You now need to pay us 30% or 50%. And so it's something that we adjust our budget to accommodate those increases in contribution rates, but they are in a much better position as far as control of their own destiny of being able to address those unfunded liabilities. You're welcome.
And PERS is not fully funded. So, I mean, it's, makes me feel a little better anyway. Any other questions? And again, you've got additional resources to get in touch with should you need more information from us via city manager's office and through the executive assistant to the city manager if you need to schedule some additional time with us. Mark has a question. Mr. Yeah.
Your number?
I would be happy to provide that to you. And I think you have my card, Mr. Markell, so I think we're good.
No, I have a question.
Okay, tell you what, Mark, will you hang on to that question really quickly? Because while it's not on your agenda, we do have one of those kind of current event issues that I'd like to ask our very talented Public Works Director, John Flansburgh, to visit with all of you about today.
Just really briefly, we covered a little bit about what Public Works does. Obviously, our asset management, whether it's streets, facilities, our fleet, our sewer collection and treatment. But the one thing that people really want to know about is parking meters. And so I just thought, I'd just give you a quick briefing on parking meters. We had the kiosk system here in town, went through that for 2.5 years or so. We terminated the contract with the vendor for that kiosk. We then went out for requests for proposals, came back in. We're installing in single space credit card meters. And so hopefully if you have a chance to use those, we've received some feedback, and the feedback's been pretty good, unless you're under 5 feet tall, and then the feedback wasn't that good. But seriously, what I want to talk about, we went and put all the new meters in. When I talk about a meter, it really is you take the old housing top off, you put the old meter out, you put the new meter in, you still have the same post, you have the same housing going in there. I think a lot of people are confused or misled to think that we installed all these meters and now they're the wrong height, and what are you guys thinking of? And so just to bring everybody up to speed, no, We put them on the same old poles that we had with the same housings that were there, and now we're going through and we're measuring twice and we're going to cut once. And we're about a third of the way through that process to put them at the right height. They're going to actually be 48 inches from the sidewalk up to the top button, and that'll meet the ADA requirement, as well as those who are less than 5 feet tall. They can now see as well. So you're welcome, Idora.
So that's good.
And they're solar powered, yes. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks, John. And as John said, and as I said at the beginning of my presentation, I mean, we've given you a high-level overview. We spent a lot of time on public safety today because that's what we heard from a number of you, and what we've heard from candidates in the past has really been an area where there's been additional information, but there is great work going on every day by really talented men and women all throughout this organization in public works, in community development, in parks and recreation, and we know that you may have some questions around those. So we encourage you to work through Visha to get those requests to Andrew, and we'll get you that information. One other thing that I wanted to mention, you know, when I talked about our overview about the Reno city government at the beginning, you heard a lot in the presentations today, particularly when you heard from Chief Hernandez and from Deputy Chief Venzen about regional partnerships. And yes, we are the city of Reno, and yes, you are running for an elected office for the city of Reno. Sometimes drama sells newspapers better than happy stories. So I wanted to just spend a minute and talk about the value of regional collaboration. And yes, we are just the city, but we work really well and do a lot of things with our regional partners. We've got more than 60 different services where where we're collaborating or we're consolidated. And that's been going on for a number of years. You look at things all the way from animal services, which a decade ago were consolidated. We went out to the voters and talked about the best way to efficiently, because I'll tell you what, cats and dogs really don't care about jurisdictional boundaries. But all the way to our recent efforts to work with the business license offices in Reno and Sparks and Washoe County to make sure that we have the same forms and the same, really no wrong door. You want to do business in this community, you can come to any one of our doors, and we're going to help you do business throughout the Truckee Meadows. And so I think it's really important for all of you to know that yes, you're looking to join the organization of the City of Reno, and we have great men and women here that work for us, but we work really well with our colleagues at the other local governments throughout the community. So if there are questions that you may have about how we interface with others, there's a lot to be made when we don't agree. That sells more newspapers, and I get it. But there's a lot of good work going on across those jurisdictional boundaries. So I wanted to take a minute to just point that out. And again, thank you for being here. I think there may have been a couple of other questions, general questions that we can answer. Mark, you had another question.
The heroin and meth problem, what are you doing about that?
It's an important issue.
So the question was, what are we doing about the heroin and meth problem? And neither of those two problems are really unique to us. They're not brand new issues. They've been ongoing issues. I can tell you from a personal standpoint, I've worked in narcotics for a good majority of my career. And so there are a couple of different approaches that we're taking in the realm of narcotics now that maybe weren't traditionally taken in as much as we're doing them now. We're working a lot with prevention and education. And we've learned through a lot of different research that prevention and education dollars are much better spent than enforcement dollars, to be honest with you. That doesn't preclude us from having to do enforcement. We still need to do enforcement, but we're working toward a prevention education model that is sustainable. Right now, it's grant funded, but we want to make it a sustainable function of the narcotics unit.
It's grant funded, it's not for the drug dealer buying you off, is it?
No, no. Drug dealers aren't buying us off.
I don't know, but yeah, I think your word for it.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions that you may have that you want to put out to the group? Doesn't look like. Thank you. Thanks. Those of us who presented will stick around. If you have questions for us individually, we'd be pleased to answer them. Anything that comes to mind after you leave here today, when you're out in the community, please feel free to get back to us with specific questions through Visha. Remember, Reno.gov is a great resource for you. Lots of good information about our organization there. And we wish you all the best of luck and look forward to seeing you over the coming months.